Stop. Just stop for a moment. Take one slow breath and look at the world around you. Because something about reality may be far stranger than you were ever taught to believe. You wake up, check your phone, look at the same walls, walk through the same streets, and assume the universe is simply there, solid, fixed, and completely separate from you. But what if that picture is incomplete? What if the way you observe reality changes the way you experience it? And what if one simple quantum principle could make you question something you have believed your entire life? You may have heard the word quantum before. Maybe you heard it in a science video. Maybe you saw it connected to energy, particles, consciousness, or the strange behavior of the universe. But there is one idea that becomes especially interesting when you slow down and really think about it. The observer matters. In the quantum world, measurement is not always as simple as standing outside something and watching it happen. At the smallest scales we can study, nature does things that challenge our everyday understanding of reality. And this is where the story becomes personal. Because you are also an observer. Every day, you notice certain things and ignore thousands of others. You focus on one possibility and overlook another. You remember certain moments, attach meaning to them, and build a picture of who you are from those experiences. But here's the question. Are you only observing your reality? Or are you also shaping the way that reality appears to you? That question can change everything. Imagine standing in front of a massive door in a place you have never seen before. Behind you is everything familiar, your old fears, old habits, old disappointments, and the version of yourself you already understand. In front of you is the unknown. You cannot see what is waiting on the other side. So you hesitate. Not because the door is locked, but because you don't know who you will become after opening it. That is where many people stay for years. They keep watching the same door. They keep waiting for certainty. They keep asking for proof that the next step will work before they ever take it. And slowly, without realizing it, they begin confusing familiarity with truth. But you are here right now for a reason. Not because this video can magically control the universe. Not because quantum physics gives you a secret button for getting everything you want. But because learning how reality actually behaves can force you to question the assumptions through which you have been looking at your own life. And that is where the real shift begins. You won the resonance match. Not against another person. Against the version of you that was ready to keep looking away. Because something happens when you become aware of the way you are observing your life. You begin noticing patterns. You notice which thoughts return again and again. You notice which fears quietly control your decisions. You notice how one painful experience can become a filter through which you interpret everything that comes afterward. And suddenly, the universe does not look exactly the same. The world may still be the same world, but you are no longer looking through the same eyes. That is the first threshold, and there is something even deeper waiting beyond it. Because if observation changes what you know about a quantum system, what does that teach you about the limits of your own perception? What have you been missing simply because you never thought to look there? Here's the viral line you need to remember. Sometimes the biggest change in reality begins with a change in what you are willing to notice. Stay with that thought, because in a moment, we are going deeper into the principle itself and what it reveals about the strange relationship between possibility, observation, and the universe you think you already understand. But first, ask yourself one question. What if your current view of reality is not reality itself, but only the version your mind has learned to recognize? That question is where the next door begins to open. Now let us go deeper. Because there is a reason the idea of observation feels so unsettling when you really think about it. In everyday life, you assume things have a definite state whether you look at them or not. A chair is a chair. A door is open or closed. A light is either on or off. Simple. Predictable. But the quantum world does not always behave according to that familiar picture. At extremely small scales, particles can exist in combinations of possible states before a measurement gives you a definite result. This is often described through the idea of superposition. And suddenly, the word possibility takes on a completely different meaning. Imagine standing in a room filled with hundreds of doors. You cannot open all of them. You cannot know what is behind every door. But until you choose one, your experience contains many possible directions. Now imagine that your life works in a similar way. Every morning, You wake up carrying possibilities you cannot yet see. A conversation could change your day. A decision could change your direction. A person you meet could introduce you to an entirely different future. A moment of courage could take you somewhere fear never would. You do not experience every possibility at once. You experience one path. And the moment you choose, act, and pay attention, your experience begins narrowing around that choice. But here is where people make a mistake. They look at their current reality and assume it was always destined to happen. They look backward and say, "This was inevitable." No. Many times, you simply cannot see all the paths that were available before you made your decisions. That does not mean you can magically create anything you imagine. It means your perception of possibility is often much smaller than possibility itself. And this is where the quantum principle becomes a powerful metaphor for your life. You may think your future is already written because your present looks fixed, but your present is not the entire story. Think about someone who has spent years hearing the same inner message. I'm not ready. I'm not good enough. This will probably fail. People like me don't get opportunities like that. At first, those thoughts feel like facts. Then they become expectations. Then expectations influence choices. Choices create habits. Habits shape behavior. And behavior begins producing a life that seems to confirm the original belief. Do you see the loop? The person thinks they are observing reality, when in some cases, they are repeatedly selecting what they notice, what they attempt, what they avoid, and what they expect. That is not magic. That is human psychology. But once you understand the difference between observation and interpretation, something changes. You stop asking only, "What is happening to me?" And you begin asking, "What am I noticing? What am I assuming? What possibilities am I ignoring?" That is a much more powerful question. Because the universe may be full of information you are not currently seeing. Not because it is hiding from you, but because your attention has limits. Think of a radio. Every station may be broadcasting at the same time, but your radio only plays the frequency you are tuned to. You don't say the other stations disappeared. You simply understand that you are not tuned to them. Your attention can work in a similar way. If you constantly search for rejection, you become highly sensitive to rejection. If you constantly search for evidence that nothing will work, you notice every obstacle. You begin seeing things that were always around you but previously remained outside your attention. And that brings us to a deeper question. What happens when you stop treating your first interpretation of reality as the final truth? That is the threshold. Because the moment you question your interpretation, you create space for another possibility. You don't need to pretend everything is perfect. You don't need to deny pain. You don't need to convince yourself that every thought creates physical events in the universe. You simply need to recognize that your mind is not a perfect mirror. It is a filter. And filters can change. Not because the universe suddenly transformed overnight, but because you changed what you were capable of seeing. And here's what most people never realize. Sometimes the door they thought was missing was never missing. They were simply standing in front of the wrong wall. So take a breath. Look at your life differently for a moment. There may be a possibility you have already rejected without giving it a fair chance. There may be a path you stopped considering because an old version of you decided it was impossible. There may be a future that feels invisible simply because you have never trained yourself to look for it. And this changes everything. Because the next question is not whether the universe contains possibilities. The next question is, which possibilities are you prepared to notice? Remember this. Your reality may not change when you demand a different world. It can begin changing when you become capable of seeing a different one. And now we are approaching the part where this principle becomes even more personal. Because once you understand what observation does to your perception, you have to confront something much harder. What happens when the observer is you? Now listen carefully, because this is where the idea becomes much more personal. You have spent your entire life looking at reality from one position, your own. You see the world through your memories, your experiences, your fears, your expectations, and the meaning you give to everything that happens. Two people can stand in the same room, hear the same words, experience the same event, and walk away with completely different realities. Why? Because seeing is not the same as understanding. Your mind is constantly deciding what deserves your attention. Think about the last time you felt that everything was going wrong. Maybe one message was ignored. One opportunity disappeared. Someone changed toward you. A plan failed. And suddenly, your mind connected all of those moments into one story. Nothing is working. But was that the entire reality? Probably not. There may have also been small moments of progress. Someone may have supported you. An opportunity may have appeared that you didn't recognize. You may have handled something better than the old version of you would have. But when your attention locks onto one interpretation, everything else can fade into the background. This is why your attention is powerful. Not because it possesses supernatural control over every event, but because attention influences what information you process, what patterns you recognize, and what actions you take next. And those actions matter. Imagine you are walking through a huge city. You have never been there before. Every street looks unfamiliar. Every building seems important. Every direction appears possible. Then someone hands you a map. But the map only highlights one type of location. Suddenly, you begin noticing those places everywhere. The city did not suddenly create them. Your attention simply became tuned to them. This happens in your life more often than you realize. When you start thinking about buying a certain car, you suddenly see that car everywhere. When you become interested in a particular subject, you begin noticing conversations about it. When you start believing you are capable of something, you begin seeing opportunities you previously ignored. The world did not necessarily change overnight. Your filter changed. And when the filter changes, your experience changes. Now here is the deeper part. What if you have been carrying an old filter for years? A belief someone gave you when you were young. A failure you never fully released. A rejection that became part of your identity. A mistake you keep using as evidence against yourself. Maybe you once heard, "You can't do that." Maybe you tried something and failed. Maybe someone walked away and you quietly decided that you were not worth staying for. And without realizing it, that moment became a lens. Every new opportunity every new relationship passed through it. Every new challenge passed through it. You were not simply living. You were interpreting. And interpretation can become so automatic that you stop realizing it is happening. But today, you can interrupt that pattern. Not by pretending the past never happened. Not by forcing yourself to believe something unrealistic. Simply by asking, is this actually true? Or is this simply the way I have learned to see it? That question creates space. And space creates choice. At the smallest scales, nature challenges our simple idea that everything always has one obvious, fixed state waiting to be revealed. And your own life can teach you something similar. Sometimes what feels like certainty is only a limited view of possibility. You think the door is closed, but perhaps you have only stopped searching for another entrance. You think the chapter is over, but perhaps the ending only belongs to an old version of the story. You think you missed your chance, but perhaps you were never meant to take that particular path. And here's the twist. You may spend years asking the universe for a sign, while ignoring the signs created by your own changing behavior. You become more confident. You stop chasing what hurts you. You start learning. You start noticing patterns. You start saying no. You start saying yes. You begin protecting your attention. And suddenly, your life begins moving differently. Not because you controlled every variable, but because you changed the person making the choices. That is a transformation most people overlook. They want a new reality, but they keep using the same thoughts, same habits, same reactions, and same decisions to search for it. Then they wonder why everything feels familiar. But you are not trapped inside one version of yourself. You can observe yourself. You can question yourself. You can change yourself. And that means the observer can also become the observed. For one moment, stop thinking about the outside world. Look inward. Notice the thought that appears when you imagine your future. Is it excitement? Fear? Doubt? Hope? Now ask yourself, where did that thought come from? Was it created by what is happening right now? Or did it come from something that happened years ago? Because if an old experience is controlling the way you interpret a new possibility, then you are allowing yesterday to observe tomorrow for you. And that is a powerful thing to recognize. Here's your next threshold. You do not need to know the entire future to choose a different direction today. That is your viral line. Remember it. You don't need perfect certainty. You need enough awareness to recognize that another possibility exists. And once you recognize that possibility, you can make a different choice. A different choice creates a different action. A different action creates a different pattern. And a different pattern can eventually create a life that no longer resembles the one you thought you were destined to live. But there is still one mystery left. If observation can change what we know about the quantum world, and attention can change what we notice in our own world, then what happens when you deliberately train your attention? What happens when you stop allowing fear to decide what deserves your focus? Because that is where the next layer begins. Now let us take this one step further. Because understanding your attention is only the beginning. The real question is what happens when you start using it deliberately, not to control the universe, not to force reality to obey your wishes, but to stop letting unconscious fear decide what you see. Think about a camera. A camera can capture an entire landscape, but the photographer still chooses where to point the lens. The mountain is there. The river is there. The people are there. The sunlight is there. But the final picture depends on what the camera is aimed at. Your attention works in a similar way. Your life contains thousands of details every day. Some are painful. Some are beautiful. Some are completely ordinary. And your mind cannot process everything equally. So it selects. It focuses. It filters. It creates a story. And sometimes, that story becomes so familiar that you mistake it for reality itself. This is why changing your attention can feel almost like entering another world. Imagine waking up tomorrow and making one small decision. Instead of asking, what could go wrong today? You ask, what possibility have I not noticed yet? It is a simple question, but it changes the direction of your attention. Now your mind begins searching differently. You notice the person who offers help. You notice the idea you almost ignored. You notice the skill you have been developing. You notice the opportunity hidden inside a problem. You notice that one closed door may have forced you toward another path. And suddenly, the same life looks different. Again, this does not mean your thoughts magically control every event. Reality is more complicated than that. Other people have choices. Circumstances exist. Random events happen. The physical world has rules. But within those limits, you still have something powerful. Your response. Your attention. Your decisions. Your interpretation. And your ability to act. That is where your power becomes real. Now imagine a person walking through a dark desert at night. They cannot see the entire road. They have no map that reveals every mile ahead. They only have a small light in their hands. The light does not illuminate the entire desert. It only reveals the next few steps. Would you say the path does not exist because they cannot see the whole thing? Of course not. They simply cannot see everything yet. Your future can feel the same way. You want certainty. You want guarantees. You want to know exactly what happens 5 years from now. But life rarely gives you that. Instead, you get the next step. Then another. Then another. This is where fear makes a strange promise. Fear says, wait until you know everything. But everything can never be known in advance. So you wait. And while you wait, nothing changes. Then you call the lack of movement proof that you were right to be afraid. That is the loop. But you can break it. You can say, I don't know what happens next, and still move. You can admit uncertainty, and still have courage. You can feel fear, and still choose. That is not weakness. That is awareness. And here's something even more interesting. The universe does not need you to understand every mystery before you appreciate its mystery. Quantum physics does not tell you that you can think something into existence simply by wanting it. It does something more valuable. It reminds you that reality at its deepest levels can be stranger than ordinary experience suggests. It reminds you that the universe is not obligated to match the simple mental picture you created as a child. And that realization can humble you. It can also free you. Because if reality is more complex than you assumed, then maybe your current situation is more complex too. Maybe the story you have been telling yourself is incomplete. Maybe your failure was not the final answer. Maybe your rejection was not a measurement of your worth. Maybe your delay was not proof that you were forgotten. Maybe you simply reached a point where your old way of seeing things could no longer take you forward. And this is where the threshold opens. You begin separating facts from stories. Fact. Something ended. Story. My life is over. Fact. Someone rejected you. Story. Nobody will ever choose me. Fact. You failed. Story. I am incapable. The fact may be real, but the story is an interpretation, and interpretations can change. That does not erase what happened. It changes what happens next. You are no longer asking, why did this happen to me? You begin asking, what can I learn from what happened? What can I do differently now? What possibility exists that I could not see before? Those questions create movement, and movement creates information. You act. You observe. You learn. You adjust. And then you act again. That is how real transformation happens. Not through one magical moment, through a series of conscious choices. So take another breath. And think about one area of your life where you have already decided the ending. Maybe you believe you are too late. Maybe you believe you are not talented enough. Maybe you believe the opportunity is past. Maybe you believe the person you used to be is the person you must remain. Now pause. Don't force yourself to believe the opposite. Just ask one question. What if I am seeing only one possible version of this story? Let the question remain open, because an open question can sometimes take you farther than a forced answer. And remember this. The moment you question the story you have always believed, you create room for a future you have never seen. But now we are approaching something even deeper, because changing what you notice is powerful. Changing what you believe is powerful. But there is another level. The moment when you stop merely observing your patterns and begin consciously choosing what deserves your attention. That is where your next transformation begins. Now you are standing at the most important part of this journey. Because awareness alone is not enough. You can understand your patterns. You can recognize your fears. You can notice the stories your mind repeats. But eventually, you have to choose what you will do with that awareness. This is where observation becomes action. Imagine you are standing inside an ancient library. Not a library filled with ordinary books, but one where every shelf represents a different version of your life. One shelf holds the person who stayed afraid. Another holds the person who kept waiting. Another holds the person who trusted every doubt. And somewhere deeper in the library, there is a shelf containing choices you have never made. You walk past it every day, not because it is locked, because you never thought to look there. Then one day, you stop. You reach toward a book. You open it. And the first page contains a question. What would you choose if you stopped assuming you already knew the ending? You stare at those words. And suddenly, something becomes clear. You have been treating your past like a prophecy. Every disappointment became evidence. Every delay became a warning. Every mistake became an identity. But your past is not a prophecy. It is information. And information can teach you without controlling you. That distinction can change the direction of your life. You do not need to erase your past. You need to stop allowing it to make every decision for your future. This is why conscious attention matters. When you deliberately choose what deserves your focus, you begin changing the questions you ask. Instead of, why does this always happen to me? You ask, what is this teaching me? Instead of, what if I fail? You ask, what would I learn if I tried? Instead of, what if nothing changes? You ask, what is one thing I can change today? Those questions may look small, and behavior is where your imagined future meets the physical world. You think. You choose. You act. You observe the result. You learn. And then you choose again. That cycle is powerful because it keeps you moving. You are no longer waiting for reality to give you permission. You are participating in your own life. And this is where the quantum idea becomes a doorway rather than a destination. Quantum mechanics does not prove that your thoughts can instantly rearrange the universe around you. But it does challenge the simple idea that reality is always as straightforward as it appears. And that reminder is enough to make you curious. If the universe can surprise us at its smallest scales, how much might we still misunderstand about our own experience? How much of your life have you labeled impossible simply because you have never tested another approach? How many doors did you stop approaching because one door closed? How many possibilities did you reject before they had a chance to become real choices? You may never know. But you can begin looking again. That is the shift. Not blind belief. Curiosity. Not pretending. Awareness. Not waiting for a perfect sign. Taking the next honest step. And perhaps that is what you were really missing. Not another prediction about your future, but permission to stop treating your current reality as permanent. Think about that. Your current situation is real, but real does not always mean permanent. A season can be real and still end. A struggle can be real and still change. A mistake can be real and still become a lesson. A closed door can be real and still lead you toward another entrance. You are allowed to grow beyond the version of yourself that made yesterday's decisions. And when you do, your world begins to feel different. You notice different people. You ask different questions. You tolerate different things. You protect your energy differently. You make different choices. And slowly, the future you once imagined as impossible begins looking less impossible. Not because you forced the universe to obey you, because you became someone capable of walking toward it. Now take a moment. Put everything aside. No phone. No noise. No need to prove anything. Just breathe and ask yourself, what deserves my attention now? Not tomorrow. Not next year. Now. Maybe it is your health. Maybe your education. Maybe your creativity. Maybe a dream you abandoned. Maybe your family. Maybe your peace. Maybe simply becoming someone you respect when nobody is watching. Whatever your answer is, protect it, because attention is limited. Every hour you spend feeding fear is an hour you cannot spend building clarity. Every moment you spend comparing your path to someone else's is a moment taken away from your own. And every time you redirect your attention toward something meaningful, you strengthen a different pattern. You will still have difficult days. You will still doubt yourself. You will still feel lost sometimes. The difference is, you no longer have to believe every thought that appears in your mind. You can observe it. You can question it. And you can choose your next move. That is freedom. And here is the line you should carry with you. You cannot control every possibility in the universe, but you can choose which possibility you are willing to walk toward. Let that settle, because there is one final piece. You have learned about observation. You have learned about attention. You have learned about interpretation. You have learned why possibility matters. But there is still one question waiting at the center of everything. What happens when you combine awareness with intention, and then repeat that choice long enough for your life to change? That answer is where this entire journey reaches its final threshold. Now you have reached the final threshold. And before you go any further, remember what this journey was really about. It was never about believing that you can control every particle in existence with a thought. It was never about pretending that difficult things do not happen. And it was never about escaping reality. It was about learning to look at reality with greater awareness. Because the moment you realize that your perception is not the whole universe, you become curious again. And curiosity changes you. You begin to question the beliefs you once treated as facts. You begin to notice the patterns you once ignored. You begin to separate what actually happened from the story you built around what happened. And slowly, you become less controlled by automatic reactions. You start choosing. That may sound simple, but choosing consciously is one of the most powerful things you can do. Think back to the doors from the beginning. You were standing in front of one. Behind you was everything familiar. In front of you was uncertainty. And perhaps you thought the door was waiting for some magical sign. But maybe the real purpose of the door was to show you something. You were never supposed to know everything before taking the first step. You were supposed to discover what was beyond it by moving. That is how life works. You learn by doing. You understand by experiencing. You discover new possibilities by giving them a chance to exist. And this is where the quantum principle leaves you with something far more valuable than a mysterious idea. It leaves you with a question. What are you going to observe now? Will you keep searching for proof that you are stuck? Or will you start looking for evidence that you can grow? Will you keep measuring yourself against your past? Or will you allow yourself to become someone new? Will you keep staring at the door that closed? Or will you finally turn around and look at the doors you never noticed? You don't have to answer everything today. You only need to become more conscious of the next choice. Take a breath. Look at your life. There is something you already know you need to change. Maybe you have been delaying it. Maybe you have been afraid. Maybe you have been waiting for the perfect moment. But perfect moments rarely arrive. Sometimes you create the moment by deciding that you are done waiting. So choose one thing, one habit, one conversation, one goal, one boundary, one step. Then observe what happens. Learn from it. Adjust. Continue. That is not fantasy. That is participation. You are not standing outside your life watching everything happen. You are inside it. Your decisions matter. Your attention matters. Your actions matter. And while you cannot control every event that enters your life, you can become more intentional about what you do with the events that arrive. That is where your future begins to separate from your past. Not in one dramatic flash, but in thousands of small moments when you choose differently. One thought, one decision, one action, then another, and another. Until one day you look around and realize that the life you are living is no longer the life you were afraid you would have. That is the real transformation. Not becoming someone who never feels fear. Becoming someone who no longer allows fear to make every decision. Not becoming someone who knows everything. Becoming someone who is willing to keep learning. Not becoming someone who controls the universe. Becoming someone who understands that the universe is larger, stranger, and more mysterious than any single explanation. And perhaps that is the most beautiful part. There is still more to discover. Science continues asking questions. Human beings continue searching. The universe continues revealing things we never expected. So don't turn mystery into certainty. Let mystery make you curious. Let curiosity make you observe. Let observation make you question. Let questions make you learn. Let learning change your choices. And let those choices shape the person you become. Because here is the final truth. You do not need to know exactly where the road ends to take the next step. You only need enough courage to stop assuming that the road you are on is the only road available. So remember this. The universe may be larger than your understanding, but your next choice is still yours. Take one final breath and notice something. You started this journey looking at the universe, but somehow you ended up looking at yourself. Maybe that was the real threshold all along. Maybe the biggest shift was never about changing the universe. Maybe it was about changing the way you meet the universe. With more curiosity, more awareness, more patience, more courage, and less fear. So when this video ends, don't immediately rush back into the noise. Sit quietly for a moment. Ask yourself what you have been refusing to notice. Ask yourself what possibility you have been dismissing too quickly. Ask yourself what old story is ready to be questioned. And then, choose one small action. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Today. Because awareness without action becomes another forgotten idea. But awareness followed by action can become a new direction. And a new direction, repeated long enough, can become a new life. You are ready to look again. You are ready to question. You are ready to choose. And perhaps, you are ready to discover that the universe was never as simple as you thought. Neither were you. What is the universe trying to show me? The question is, what am I finally willing to see?